Didn't realize my neighbor was an abusive, drunken, drug addict. One time while my family was about to start eating dinner, a woman opened my front door and screamed into the house, "Please, I need to use your phone to call the police." She was frantic and crying and had makeup running down her face. Turns out she was a prostitute that my neighbor had hired. At one point during their interaction, he pulled out a gun and threatened her in some way. Eventually he went to get another drink and she seized that opportunity to run to my house. There were other times when I saw him doing pretty shitty things, but this one stands out as it was the first time I saw someone in fear for their life and first time I saw a prostitute. Had a shared driveway. Outside at 4 AM with a laser pointer trying to find property lines. Wants to put a gate up blocking the driveway and we would have to knock on her door to come and go. Would turn around on our property and almost crush our sewer line. Tried to sleep with my husband. Party on her roof. Kick down our signs and shoot BBS at our dog. Tons more things I'm choosing to forget. FCKU Shannon. I live in a flat and my upstairs neighbor pees of his balcony. I can see and hear his beam going past my window frequently. Hey, I've had this exact same problem. Buddy lived upstairs. Pissed down onto our back door. Right where we sit and smoke. Real piece of shitty alcoholic f-king idiot. At that point, if it's going on your back deck or back porch, I'd probably press charges. I didn't really interact with my upstairs neighbors when I was in my first apartment. But their religion prohibited them from killing anything. Including roaches. Their apartment became a breeding ground and the roaches would spill into the rest of the building. Including mine below. It was a horrible experience and felt so hopeless because it didn't matter how clean we were or how diligent. The buggers were always everywhere. We're having a similar issue here. We don't know who. But someone in this building is a nasty ass and has led there to be a massive infestation in the attic. Management has sent pest control to no avail. They always come back. Only 6 more months. Only 6 more. When I was very young, we lived next door to an elderly couple and their adult daughter. The adult daughter had kids and grandkids of her own, but she had some issues and couldn't live on her own or with them. And X200B. I don't remember how it started, but she, the adult daughter of neighbors, started venturing further into our property until one day she walked right into our house while we were in the living room. My mother was pregnant at the time and babysitting other children. Mom was so startled she jumped up and chased her out of the house. On another occasion, she came storming over to our house with a mop in her hand, determined to attack my mother. She had to call my uncle to come over and I remember him putting his entire body weight on the door to keep her out. The police end up getting called and she is taken away for psychiatric evaluation. After that, the police had to come back to talk to my parents because while being evaluated, she claimed that my mother had kidnapped her son, chained him in the basement, and then cut him up and cooked him. Obviously none of that was true. After that, if we were playing outside and she came outside, we immediately ran inside and locked the doors. I don't know what her diagnosis was or why she fixated on my mother. We eventually moved when I was around 12. My parents' neighbor owns a landscaping company. So he has a dump truck. His house is set further back from the road than theirs. So his driveway, which is right on the property line, extends past their house and next to their backyard. My dad noticed the neighbor turning the dump truck around in my parents' backyard when the ground was very soft from some recent rain. He went back, and sure enough, there were giant ruts in my parents' yard. When my dad confronted the neighbor about using their backyard to turn around, the neighbor responded by saying, "I'm sorry, but if I turned it around in my yard, it would have left ruts in my lawn." So he knew it would leave ruts. Didn't want them in his yard. And left them in my parents' yard instead. Had a neighbor who let his dog run free. It would get into our yard, give our dogs fleas, eat all the food and teach them how to escape. No matter what my mom said, the guy denied his dog was getting out. So being fed up with the situation, my mom dyed the dog purple and sent it on its merry way. The neighbor kept his dog contained after that. Note: the dye was a non-toxic semi-permanent dog dye. No harm came to the pupper. Before Harvey, his dogs were constantly in our yard, eating our dog food, eating our outdoor cat food, shitting on our property, and no matter what we did or how many times we talked with him, it never changed and it always the fault of the dog. After Harvey, he abandoned his flooded home, 4 FT water in our homes in our area, and hasn't returned. The home is not in good condition and now we don't have the dogs but we have pests and snakes because his yard hasn't been mowed for over a year. We are currently working on filing a grievance through the county. My friend's upstairs neighbor has a dog. He never takes for a walk or out for a poop. So the dog just shits on the balcony, and when it dries he shovels off the balcony onto the cars below. Then throws water on it to clean it up and the shitty water drips down onto her balcony. She has called the landlord, the city, the maintenance company. No one will do anything about it. We have shouted at him while doing it and he stops for a minute but continues when we are gone. If you knock on his door, he won't answer. Call the cops and ask them to do a welfare check on this neighbor pretending you're worried because his apartment smells super bad and like something died up there. If he's that gross, likely the rest of his apartment is a hazard too. He'll either open the door for the cops or they'll force entry. If there's proof the inside of the place is a hazard, maybe he'll get evicted. Neighbor hated cats so put out cat traps, the type which crushes a leg, which my cat got caught in and dragged home. It crushed his leg and pelvis so he had to be put down. Neighbor was given a warning for animal abuse and was later charged due to his treatment of his own pets. Hated that guy. My neighbor, who was a cop, trapped our cats and took them far away. They found their way home so then she dropped them off at the pound. My mom went and got them so then she poisoned them. I'm thinking antifreeze. She killed off 4 of my mom's cats that way over time. My neighbors would gather to get drunk and yell at each other in Spanish really loud directly in front of their door that was barely 5 feet away from mine. Just use your porch or maybe f***ing go inside. Holy shit. Shout out to my boy Google Translate for helping me communicate. When I was living in an apartment, the majority of my floor spoke Spanish with very little English and we're all from different countries, but they had one f***ing thing in common. 11 PM weeknight shouting conversations in the hallway and their doorway every f***ing night. I was living in a shitty part of town at the time. I had a couple of older neighbors who could have stared in a hoarder's marathon. The garage door was burning out and splitting in areas due to the amount of shit forced into it. To top that, they had hundreds of feral cats with horrible defects. They kept the front door open 24/7 so the cats could come in and out of the house. At least the ones that lived long enough to. I would have to crawl under my house to remove the dead ones so my house didn't reek every few days. I live on the bottom floor of a dorm with balconies. Because I'm on the first floor, I don't get one. Just a big window that I can't open. And I can't get to the area outside of it because there are a bunch of prickly bushes separating us from the sidewalk. My upstairs neighbor throws his leftover food off of his balcony. I'm the only one that sees it because of the bushes. And I can't do anything about it because I can't get to that area to clean it. I'm dying inside. Edit. Clarity. My sister passed away and we had everyone in our entire family staying and meeting at our house. Lived in a townhouse and had 2 carports plus there was a number of visitor parking spaces. Day before funeral we woke to find all our cars had the tires deflated. Our neighbor was crazy at FCK. Had a son that was just as crazy and vile as she. Couldn't prove it. But they were the culprits. Called the cops and they did nothing. When we first moved in she gifted us with a decoration for our backyard. We displayed it and it mysteriously disappeared 1 month later. We saw it hanging in her backyard. She kept picking on us and we did absolutely nothing to her. My neighbor accidentally discharged a gun. And the bullet went through our sliding glass door and ended up in his pantry. We were alerted when 80% of the glass in our sliding glass door fell on the floor. I'm 5'7" and could walk through the sliding glass door without opening it. The round was found in a box of pancake mix about 6 inches over my head, so the odds of it hitting me had I been in the kitchen or walking around my house, the odds of being hit were very high. Edited for clarity. When I still lived in Germany, a Russian family lived across the street. About 7 people. No one worked. They spent all their time sitting outside, smoking, arguing, having friends over, all year round. One December night they had a barbecue outside, sitting around a fire while it was snowing. Nothing bothered them, but they bothered everyone else. When you tried to talk to them, they acted like they didn't understand German. No matter where I live now, it's quieter. Downhill neighbor had a wide open view of our beautiful lower yard. They got a barky dog that they left in their backyard all day. Dog torn down our fence trying to get out and get to our dog. We built a new solid wood fence and then they complained, now that they couldn't see our yard, that we were spying on them from our yard. Whatever. Then they built a raised deck so that they could see over the fence. We planted a row of bamboo and haven't seen them since. They called the building department about our fence. The building department came out, said it was legit, and cited them for their illegal deck. 3 brothers in their 60s who would drink whiskey in their yard all day. They called code enforcement on everyone constantly. Put signs in the yard with curse words all over them. Sold drugs to kids. Tried to stab a neighbor. Tried to hit another neighbor with a car. Would drink and drive and hit cars parked on the street. Put trash and furniture in the middle of the road and block it. Would scream insults at people minding their own business. Threatened to kick underage girls in the CNTS when they walked by. Threw eggs at people's cars. Shot a puppy in someone's backyard. Buried car batteries in their yard which caused a weird streak of residue to form in the road. Would go into people's backyards when they weren't home and turn on their hoses so sometimes they would run for days without anyone noticing. Punched a man with physical disabilities and broke his glasses. Streaked when there were kids around. Drunkenly swung knives in the air. Beat their kids in the yard. Hit their wives and girlfriends in the yard. Would randomly stand in the street in front of their house in direct traffic for no reason. Pretended to commit suicide on front of a group of kids. Threatened to burn down people's houses. And put screws and nails behind the tires of people's parked cars. Edit. To clarify, the puppy did live. My neighbor locks her kids outside no matter the weather and she doesn't answer the door. They're probably 3 and 5. Just one example. We were having a huge evergreen tree cut down in our front yard. Maybe 7 feet from the property line. I told her, you might want to back your car into the street so it doesn't get filthy. She moved the car, but locked her 3-year-old son outside the entire time. I mean, my friend's neighbor used to let her young kids hang around other neighbors' houses by themselves until one day my friend's husband ran over the little girl by mistake. He had no idea the kid was playing behind his car. The whole town turned on him. Even though he was absolved of everything, the child lived though, he contemplated killing himself over it. I moved a lot growing up so I've had a few. One neighbor in Florida was a known kleptomaniac. But he would steal the most random items around the neighborhood. When someone moved out of a house, he would dig up the plants from the yard and sell them online. We would just wake up one morning and all of the plants would be gone with the trail of dirt leading to his house. When his house foreclosed, he stole all of the doors off their hinges before moving out. He stole another neighbor's bicycle when they left their garage door open. The owner knew it was the klepto so he just walked over to his house and took it back without calling the cops. We also later found out that he was going through a nasty divorce from his wife, who was once his therapist. My neighbors in Pennsylvania would catcall me frequently when I walked home from school in my Catholic uniform. I was 10 at the time. Luckily they stopped when my mom glared at them. Several neighbors in Texas were horrible. I was pretty young at the time, but if I remember correctly, a couple of them were discovered and later convicted as pedophiles. And another neighbor was Dolly Rucher, a woman convicted of murdering her 2 children. So, yeah. I've had a few bad neighbors. I had this neighbor once who turned out to be seriously mentally ill. I would say she was in her 50s or 60s. She seemed nice and normal at first, but eventually we would hear her screaming to nobody inside her unit at all hours of the day. Bloody murder screaming. Swearing. completely losing her shit nobody. She lived totally alone. It was kind of scary. Actually, I had some other neighbors around my age that lived underneath me. A couple that was male-female. If the female ever had guy friends come over, the crazy neighbor would knock on her door and start screaming at her that she was running a brothel and that she was a prostitute. It got worse and worse over time to the point that both myself and my downstairs neighbors emailed detailed complaints to our landlord. Eventually, they called some sort of adult social services department on her and she was finally evicted. We felt kind of bad. But Jesus Christ. I guess the second worst neighbors would be the male-female couple I mentioned that lived underneath me. They'd have extremely loud sex in the middle of the night. Use a blender juicer at 5 a.m. every single day. And would play a F-King didgeridoo for hours. I absolutely hate didgeridoos now. Was living in a duplex for a little while and the master bedrooms were right next to each other. The walls were so thin and a few days after getting the place we found out our neighbors were screamers. Video games. Drinking with friends. Arguments. In bed. Usually in that order. I have an asshole neighbor that loves calling the cops any chance he gets. If we leave our car doors open too long. If we get too close to his yard or anyone else's yards. If our dog is too loud. He's calmed down a bit over the years. But it used to get heated between him and this white trash family that lived next to him for a while. They were just as bad. They abused their dogs. Leaving them locked up in their backyard. Never fed them. Always let them break out and run around the neighborhood. Screamed at each other often out in the open. And one time some of their relatives came over and they started arguing and pulled guns on each other. I think they may have tried to burn their house down one time because they couldn't get it to sell. Needless to say, nothing happened because the asshole next door called 911 within minutes. When living with my dad in a duplex. The downstairs neighbor was a family of I think 8 people in a 2BR house. They were all on pills. Sat on the porch 24/7. None of them had a job. Frequently had police because of fights. Oh. And they bred chihuahuas. So constant sound of dogs barking and yelping. At the same time the neighbors on the same floor as us, very thin walls, was a family of 3 where the 2 kids constantly fought for whose turn it was on the Xbox. I could hear them talking people over the mic all the time. One time I put my guitar amp against the wall on full volume. I usually play unplugged or with headphones because volume at 2 shakes the floors. They were quiet for a little bit. But it never stopped. So glad I moved out. Our downstairs neighbor has the loudest sex. But it's not just loud sex. The whole situation is f***ed up. It's always in the middle of the night. And he is the one that's loud. Grunting and screaming. It's very obvious when he comes because he's so f***ing loud. And whenever she makes noise she screams bloody murder instead of moaning. One time my husband and I seriously considered calling the cops because we thought she was being abused. The screaming was so bad. But then she started screaming yes. So we knew she was okay. It also goes on for like 45 minutes. I don't understand how they have the energy. We really want to tell them to shut the FCK up. But it's such an awkward conversation we've never had the balls to say anything. Next door neighbor came over to borrow ladder when husband wasn't home. Weird vibe. He stared at me from behind when I was taking the ladder down from the wall hook. Passed it off that I was being overly sensitive. Ran into him with his wife and my husband both present in a store. And he kissed my cheek in greeting. Weird. Hubs thought so too. We got a knock on the door from a government agency asking us about him. He needed a security clearance where he worked. Not a lot to report. He seemed okay. FF to him knocking on the door one Saturday morning early when he knew Hubs would be at work. I had all 4 of my kids there. I don't even remember why he came over. But it ended up with him rubbing himself against me in front of my kids and trying to unzip in front of my kids. WTAF. Should be noted I have 4 kids and all were age 5 and under at the time. WTAF. I kicked him out. Called husband. Let his wife know. Let the mom of the kids she did in home daycare for. and wife called me back begging me to retract it. Somehow it got back to his supervisor and his clearance was in jeopardy. They ended up divorced. TLDR. Inappropriate touching and he lost his government clearance because of it. Why hadn't I read The Gift of Fear before this? I'll never know.